Okay, so a number of people have asked me to look into why Louis Tomlinson signed an additional 5-year contract with Syco after the hiatus of One Direction. And I did base my research on what has been on record, what's documented in credible news sources. So keep in mind that the official story can either be exactly what happened or it can be completely a spin on what really happened. We don't know. The only people who know are the people involved. My personal, completely personal opinion, I don't know anything, I don't know these people, is that there were probably a number of factors. One being, from the research I found on Louis, he's kind of strategic and he's been known to be good with timing. So there could have been a political timing situation involved. Two, I think that he was becoming a father, and there was probably some kind of stability in the WNO because he spent how many years dealing with the WNO. Three, he began hosting as a judge on Simon's X Factor, and that steady income, which would support the fact that, yeah, he was supporting a dependent, and he was also helping his family because it's been reported that he did help send his two sisters to school, or at least two of his sisters, maybe more. And he is the oldest of seven. And at the time that the One Direction ended, the younger of the siblings would have been really quite teeny tiny. So there's a number of factors. Also, he did have a lot of industry resistance. So it could have been that Syco could have been his only option, and he had to develop the social capital of sticking with Syco until it was going to dissolve, because maybe he knew more than we thought. Maybe he knew it was going to dissolve. And that way he was able to get out of the contract. There may have been what some fans believe is bartering. I'll stay on, the other boys can be free. And because Syco went out of business, it went bankrupt, he totally got out of this machine that's no longer in existence without any litigation and in a very peaceful, optically looks good on him way. So I think there's more than one answer, but I'm going in my own opinion again, is I think a lot of it had to do with secure income. And maybe it was his way of taking a break and staying relevant, knowing that he would stay relevant, being a judge and getting that kind of regular exposures. And we don't know quite how much he was paid because not all the terms of these agreements are made public. So this is what I have found so far about how he decided to do this. So fame rarely arrives with a roadmap. For the 5 young men who became One Direction, their journey began on the X Factor stage in 2010, a moment that would launch them into a stratosphere of celebrity that few have experienced. But it's what happens when the spotlight's dim that often reveals the most about an artist's character and vision. When One Direction performed their final notes together before their hiatus in 2016, each member stood at a crossroads. Harry Styles, Zayn Malik, Niall Horan, Liam Payne, and Louis Tomlinson were 5 individuals who had shared everything from tour buses to the crushing weight of global fame, now faced the intimidating prospect of defining themselves as solo artists. So keep in mind that Niall is still with a division of Syco or connected company for the golf, like the golf arm of the business. So it makes me kind of wonder if Niall picked up some business acumen from Louis and is creating a revenue stream that's independent of music for sort of long-term income. So while most sought to distance themselves from the machine that created them, one member made a decision that surprised industry insiders and fans alike. So this guy is strategically good at surprises, which mark of genius is the ability to restrain and to have impulse control and also to temper reaction. So I think that this only kind of solidifies my impression of Louis Tomlinson as very, very smart, but also having that EQ that is really more important than IQ when you think of the game of life, right? Louis Tomlinson chose to remain with Syco Music, the very label that had shaped One Direction's rise to fame, and a company inextricably linked to Simon Cowell, the man who had brought them together. So, I don't know about you, but I have learned so much from learning about Louis that I'm kind of strangely incorporating it into my own life, but I'm not going to say why and how. That's a little too much, and it deviates from the focus of this, which is Louis. So, in an industry where label jumping has become commonplace, Tomlinson's decision raised eyebrows. Music journalist John Newman of Billboard noted the unusual nature of his choice. It was almost unheard of in that moment. After massive group success, the standard industry playbook calls for a clean slate, new management, new label, new sound. Tomlinson's decision to stay with Syco ran counter to conventional wisdom. But for Tomlinson, the decision transcended business strategy. In his 2022 documentary, All of Those Voices, he spoke candidly about the personal connections that influenced his choice. I felt a sense of loyalty to the label and to Simon. When you've been through something as monumental as One Direction with people, there's a bond there. Simon had been there from day one, and that counted for something in my decision making process. This sentiment was echoed in Tomlinson's 2020 interview with The Guardian, where he expanded on his relationship with Cowell. Simon has always been a presence in my life. When you go through something like X Factor and then the whirlwind of One Direction, those relationships become more than just business. There was a comfort in continuing with people who understood where I'd come from. This loyalty wasn't one sided. Simon Cowell spoke to Music Week in 2017 about his faith in Tomlinson's solo potential. This kind of makes me wonder, did Louis have something on Simon or something? Because, yeah, Louis has this incredible sense of intuition. He was always the one most interested in the behind the scenes work during One Direction. I always knew he had that leadership quality. When he decided to stay with us for solo work, I was genuinely thrilled because I believed in what he could accomplish. So, beyond personal loyalties lay artistic considerations, while his former bandmates pursued directions that marked clear departures from the One Direction sound. Harry Styles embracing 70s inspired rock, Zayn Malik turning toward R&B, Niall Horan exploring folkier territories, and Tomlinson, well, he had a different vision for his solo work. In a revealing 2018 interview with Billboard, Tomlinson explained his musical direction and why Syco's expertise aligned with his goals. I wanted to keep elements of that One Direction sound alive in my music. That doesn't mean making the same music, but there were aspects of our sound, that energy, that optimism, that I didn't want to lose entirely. Syco understood that world better than anyone else could. Now remember, Louis was entering his solo career with what a lot of critics have been on record saying a lot more resistance from the music industry. So if anyone saw a mutual win-win benefit to staying on with Syco, probably would have been Simon Cowell. And Simon Cowell still wanted to ride the crest waves of One Direction after the band went on hiatus. So this is a quote from Louis for NME in 2019. People always expect you to change everything when the band breaks up. There's almost this pressure to completely reinvent yourself, but I've never been afraid to honor where I've come from. Some of my solo music has threads of what we did in One Direction, and I'm proud of that connection. Industry producer Julian Bonetta, who had worked extensively with One Direction and continued collaborating with Louis Tomlinson, offered insight into their creative process during this transition period. Working with Louis after 1D was interesting because he had such clarity about what he wanted to preserve and what he wanted to leave behind. He wasn't trying to make One Direction songs as a solo artist, but he also wasn't pretending those years hadn't shaped his musical identity. Syco gave him the space to navigate that balance. The music industry of 2016 was also vastly different from the one when One Direction had entered into the scene in 2010. Streaming had transformed how music was consumed, social media had revolutionized artist-fan relationships, and the very definition of pop music was expanding. Tomlinson's decision to remain with Syco came with both advantages and disadvantages. And this was during a very fast evolving landscape. So, music industry analyst Sarah Cohen of Music Business Worldwide had assessed Tomlinson's position at the time. Tomlinson was making a calculated risk. Staying with Syco meant having the stability and resources of a major label that understood his background. But it also meant potentially being seen as less independent or adventurous than his former bandmates. He was choosing the devil he knew over the unknown. And this calculation was not lost on Tomlinson. In his interview with Rolling Stone in 2019, he acknowledged the double-edged nature of his decision. I knew what people would say, that I was playing it safe or that I lacked the courage to start fresh, but sometimes the braver choice is staying put and building something meaningful where you are, rather than running away at the first opportunity. Stephen Parker, who served as an A&R executive at Syco during this period, later revealed the behind-the-scenes discussions that took place as Tomlinson crafted his solo identity. There were long conversations about direction, about how Louis could carve out his own lane while leveraging what made him special in one direction. It wasn't about creating a carbon copy of what he'd done before, it was about evolution rather than revolution. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Tomlinson's journey with Syco wasn't about the business or music at all, it was about personal growth. The years following One Direction's hiatus brought personal tragedies and triumphs that shaped both Tomlinson as a person and his artistic output. In a particularly vulnerable moment during his 2020 documentary, Tomlinson reflected on how these experiences influenced his creative partnership with Syco. When you go through loss or become a parent, your perspective shifts dramatically. Suddenly, the music has to mean more, say more. I found myself writing lyrics that I couldn't have written 5 years earlier. The team at Syco gave me the space to grow into that more mature voice. And that was from his All of Those Voices documentary. This evolution was noticed by critics as well. Music journalist Elena Sanchez wrote in her review of Tomlinson's debut album Walls for The Independent. There's a raw authenticity to Tomlinson's work that feels earned rather than manufactured. Earned, focus on that word, earned. While staying within the pop framework Syco specializes in, he's found ways to infuse it with genuine emotion and lived experience. This isn't the work of someone constrained by his label, rather it suggests a partnership that allowed for personal expression. Friend and occasional collaborator James Author spoke about witnessing Tomlinson's artistic development during these years. Louis really found himself during that time. After 1D, he could have easily gone the obvious commercial route, but he was determined to make music that reflected who he really was. I think staying with familiar people at Syco actually gave him the confidence to be more authentic, not less. In July 2020, an unexpected development changed the trajectory of Tomlinson's solo career. Sony Music announced that Syco Music would be closing its operations, ending a 15-year chapter in the industry. Tomlinson, who had remained loyal to the label while building a solo identity, now faced another transition. In his statement following the announcement, Tomlinson reflected on his journey with characteristic thoughtfulness. My time with Syco has been a significant chapter in my story. We've been through incredible highs and challenging lows together. While this marks the end of that particular relationship, the experiences and growth I've had will always be part of me as I move forward. Industry observers noted the symbolic nature of this moment. Music journalist Rebecca Millman wrote, "There's something poetically fitting about Tomlinson's departure from Syco, coming not through conflict or creative differences, but through the natural conclusion of the label itself. He remained loyal until the very end, a quality that has defined both his professional choices and his relationship with fans." Louis is one of the most loyal artists I've ever worked with. He stayed with us through enormous changes in the industry and his personal life. As Syco closes this chapter, I couldn't be more proud of what he's accomplished and the integrity he's shown throughout. And that was Simon Cowell for Billboard in 2020. So the story of Louis Tomlinson's decision to remain with Syco for 5 years after One Direction's hiatus isn't simply about a business arrangement. It's a narrative about loyalty in an industry notorious for its fickleness, about an artist who defines success on his own terms rather than following conventional wisdom. And in his 2022 memoir, Tomlinson offered perhaps the most definitive reflection on this period of his career. Looking back, I don't measure those years by chart positions or streaming numbers. I measure them by the artist I became, the songs that still mean something to me, and the fans who connected with that honesty. Staying with Syco wasn't the easy choice. It was the right choice for who I was and who I wanted to become. And music critic David Hughes perhaps summed it up best in his retrospective on Tomlinson's journey. The true measure of Tomlinson's success isn't in comparison to his former bandmates or to his arbitrary industry standards. It's in the integrity with which he navigated the impossible task of emerging from one of the biggest bands in history as his own person. By that measure, his decision to build on his foundation rather than raise it completely can only be seen as wisdom, not limitation. So as Louis Tomlinson continues his musical journey, now signed with BMG Rights Management, he carries with him the lessons, relationships, and growth from those pivotal years with Syco. In an industry often characterized by dramatic departures and reinventions, Tomlinson's path reminds us that sometimes the most authentic journey isn't about leaving everything behind, but about carrying forward what matters while still evolving into who you're meant to become. So, for the boy from Doncaster who stood on the X Factor stage in 2010, the journey has become full circle, not because he's returned to where he began, but because he's managed to honor that beginning while writing his own unique chapter. So, the content here incorporates documented quotes from credible news sources and interviews. Some of the quotes have been condensed so that this content narrative flows. And hopefully, there's been a few things that kind of explain more as to why Louis stayed with Syco. And perhaps it indicates that the working relationship between Louis and Simon has also evolved during the years. I don't think it necessarily was a master and servant one, like some people have suggested or kind of hypothesized. I think it's much more complex than that. There may have been some backdoor, bartering, as I said, but if there's anyone to learn how to do well in the business with, if there's anyone to learn how to make money in the business with, at the same time taking what's good and leaving what's bad and upgrading what's not so helpful and making it more helpful, I think it would have been Simon Cowell. I mean, Simon Cowell is not successful for no reason. He's successful for a reason. And people are sometimes influenced by the times in which they grow up, because if you look at Simon when he was coming up in the business, the zeitgeist was very different. And at that time, closeting, it was a practice that in the sphere of a culture at the time that was not as accepting. You could see why people would really think it was necessary back then. So, not that it was ever okay. I will be very clear about that. That the closeting is not okay. There were eras where some people argue it was safer for the artist. I don't know about that. I think that if you're in an environment that's hostile to you being different, people have to do what they survive. I just think that there's a line crossed when you start to closet people and you violate their human rights, and that's just my stand on that whole situation. But I could see how Louis, like if I wanted to learn how to make a lot of money and build an infrastructure and make a name for myself and create those lines of business, who else better than Simon Cowell? So yes, it's not to say you become a duplicate. It's not to say you become the person that tormented you. Not to say that Simon tormented him, but you know what I mean. Then the business acumen of a Simon Cowell, an additional 5 years of apprenticeship in a way would make some sense, because the thing is that Simon Cowell himself was never an artist. He was always the businessman in that industry. So, after a while, people don't have a black and white relationship. It's not all adversarial or all in love. It's kind of complex. And, Simon did not have children till he was older. So the difference between Louis and Simon is that, Louis always functioned as a parent. He's always been the big brother. Then he himself was a father, and yet he's played this parental role. And his sister Lottie has talked about how after they lost their mom, Lottie stepped up to be the mother figure to the younger siblings. And so it was sort of her and Louis who, as the two oldest ones, took care of the younger ones. And there's a lot always been riding on Louis. And this guy's he's such my hero. I mean, if there's ever a rock star that you want to emulate on stage and off, it's like fucking Louis Tomlinson, man. Holy cow. Just the way he's been. And he's the guy you can rely on. And yeah, he had that long-standing Cold War with Zayn, which seems to have recently warmed. And he had wanted to kind of reconcile with Zayn, I think. There were hints of that. And it was, Zayn sort of very moody, which I think that, intellectual people like Zayn, because Zayn wanted to be an English teacher. If he had not been picked, he would have gone to university and majored in education and literature, it sounds like. So, you know, intellectual people tend tend to be moody. Oh God, I speak for myself, by the way. But I can see the bromance between Louis and Zayn, and I'm glad that they were able to connect at Zayn's concert. So I would love to see the three remaining members, and I wish Liam was here. Go on to just collaborate more because I think they truly were the talent and they truly were special.